In the early months of 2020, a specific narrative was taking hold in the wealthiest zip codes of California. The world was shutting down, and Silicon Valley, along with its heavily funded biotech cousins in Boston and San Francisco, believed they had the ultimate cheat code. They called it the software of life, mRNA. The idea was intoxicatingly simple to a tech bro mindset. You don't grow a vaccine in a messy biological vat. You code it, you print it, you update it like an iPhone operating system. And in this brave new world of digital biology, older analog methods of making vaccines were quietly, almost smugly, dismissed as clunky, slow, and dangerously obsolete. But there was a fatal flaw in the Silicon Valley solution. Their software required hardware that much of the world simply didn't have. Ultra-cold storage, plunging to minus 70 degrees Celsius. While the tech world was taking a victory lap, a team of British researchers in a remarkably unremarkable lab in Oxford, partnering with a pharmaceutical giant, doubled down on the legacy tech. A modified chimpanzee cold virus. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't programmable in the same way, but it could survive in a standard fridge. This is the story of how an allegedly obsolete technology, driven by an uncharacteristic decision from a British corporate giant, quietly became the workhorse of the developing world and arguably saved millions of lives across Asia. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we have to strip away the hindsight. By March 2020, the global economy was bleeding out. The race for a vaccine wasn't just a medical necessity. It was an unprecedented geopolitical sprint. On one side of the Atlantic, you had Operation Warp Speed, pouring billions into unproven, next-generation mRNA platforms. The American narrative was dominated by Moderna, a company that practically framed itself as a tech startup. Their executives spoke the language of Silicon Valley. mRNA was disruptive. It was scalable. By contrast, the Serum Institute at Oxford University was looking at viral vectors. Specifically, an adenovirus isolated from chimpanzees, modified so it couldn't replicate in humans, and used as a Trojan horse to deliver the spike protein instructions. To the purveyors of mRNA, the Oxford approach was old school. It involved growing actual cells in massive bioreactors. It was biology, with all its inherent unpredictability, not digital coding. It is widely reported that many within the venture capital circuits viewed these biological vector platforms as a bridge technology, something to tide us over until the real tech arrived. But Oxford researchers, led by scientists like Professor Sarah Gilbert, knew something that the venture capitalists in Palo Alto often forget. The best technology in the world is utterly useless if your end user can't turn it on. Let's look at the macroeconomic reality of 2020. The mRNA vaccines require deep freeze infrastructure. If you are in central London or New York, securing dry ice and minus 70-degree freezers is a logistical headache. If you are running a district hospital in rural Maharashtra, India, or a remote island clinic in the Philippines, it is a physical impossibility. The British team knew their legacy chimpanzee virus had one killer feature. It was stable at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, normal fridge temperature. But a university can't manufacture billions of doses. They needed a corporate partner, and this is where the story gets morally complicated. Inherently British and remarkably high stakes. Enter AstraZeneca, a British-Swedish multinational pharmaceutical and biotechnology company. Historically, they weren't even a major player in the vaccine space. Their bread and butter was oncology and cardiovascular drugs, high margin, long-term treatments. When Oxford initially looked for a partner, they considered Merck, an American giant. But the UK government, allegedly anxious about the optics and security of outsourcing this critical IP to the United States, pushed for a domestic champion. AstraZeneca agreed to take it on. But they made a decision that fundamentally broke the cardinal rule of modern corporate pharma. They agreed to produce the vaccine at no profit during the pandemic. Why? Was it purely British altruism? Let's not romanticize it. The UK government poured immense political and financial capital into this. For AstraZeneca, it was a brand-defining gamble. If they succeeded, they would be global saviors. If they failed, the reputational damage would be catastrophic, and they very nearly did fail. Remember the tech bro criticism that biological manufacturing was messy? They were right. Growing an adenovirus isn't like compiling code. It's like brewing a deeply temperamental beer. Yields varied wildly between factories. In late 2020, as Pfizer and Moderna began releasing stellar trial data showing 95% efficacy, the Oxford-AstraZeneca trials were plagued by a dosing error. A subset of trial participants accidentally received a half dose. Bizarrely, this seemed to offer better protection, but it made the data look sloppy. The US regulators pounced. The American media, perhaps protective of their domestic mRNA champions, subjected the British vaccine to intense, sometimes hostile scrutiny. Suddenly, the at-cost British vaccine was being framed as the poor man's alternative, the runner-up, the obsolete option. But while the West was bickering over fractional percentage points of efficacy in pristine clinical settings, a storm was brewing in the East. AstraZeneca knew they couldn't supply the developing world from European factories. They struck a licensing deal with the Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer by volume, led by Adar Poonawalla. This was the ultimate test of the legacy tech. Serum didn't need to build futuristic deep-freeze pipelines. They took the Oxford blueprint and started pumping out millions of doses of what they called CoviShield, using standard, robust, traditional manufacturing lines. Then the Delta wave hit. In early 2021, India was suffocating. The healthcare system was collapsing. Silicon Valley's mRNA vaccines were nowhere to be found. They were too expensive, too fragile, and frankly, hoarded by Western governments who had bought up the supply. The only shield millions of people had was the very technology the tech world had dismissed. Let's look at the numbers, because they tell a story that corporate PR often misses. According to data modeling by Airfinity, in the first year of the global vaccine rollout, the AstraZeneca vaccine saved an estimated 6.3 million lives globally. A massive proportion of those were in lower middle-income countries, predominantly in Asia. Take the story of a rural healthcare worker in Indonesia. She doesn't have reliable electricity. Her clinic runs on a generator that fails twice a week. If she had been given a batch of Pfizer or Moderna, it would have spoiled before it reached the arms of her patients. Instead, she carried CoviShield in a standard cool box on the back of a moped to villages miles from the nearest paved road. The mRNA technology is undeniably brilliant. It is the future. But in 2021, the present was saved by the past. The robust, slightly less elegant, biologically messy viral vector platform was exactly what the real world required. AstraZeneca's nonprofit pledge meant the vaccine was delivered at roughly $3 to $4 a dose, compared to the $15 to $20 commanded by the mRNA alternatives. Yet, the reward for this monumental achievement was, quite often, a PR disaster. European politicians openly cast doubt on its efficacy to cover their own procurement failures. Rare clotting side effects were amplified in the press, despite the statistical risk of COVID-19 being exponentially higher. There is a deeply British irony here. A company takes a massive risk, commits to a non-profit model during a global crisis, delivers a product that works exactly as intended under brutal real-world conditions, and ends up being battered by the press and essentially abandoned by domestic policymakers the moment mRNA became widely available in the West. Today, AstraZeneca has largely stepped back from the COVID vaccine business. They have returned to their highly profitable roots in oncology and rare diseases. The at-cost pledge eventually ended. Silicon Valley and the biotech giants won the narrative war. mRNA is now the gold standard, the darling of investors, the presumptive platform for everything from flu shots to cancer treatments. The software of life proved its immense worth. But as we look back at the most acute phase of the crisis, we have to ask a difficult question about how we value innovation. We are conditioned by the tech industry to worship the new, the disruptive, the frictionless. We want solutions that sound like science fiction. But sometimes, human survival doesn't require a software update. It requires a robust piece of hardware that can survive a bumpy truck ride in 40-degree heat. The UK's legacy in global health is incredibly complex, often weighed down by the heavy, dark history of empire and resource extraction. We cannot and should not romanticize it. But in this specific instance, a British university and a British-Swedish corporation looked at the glittering promises of the new tech world and decided to build something stubbornly practical instead. They didn't build the most elegant vaccine, they built the most necessary one. And in doing so, They quietly ensured that millions of people across Asia are still here to see the future that Silicon Valley is busy designing. If you found this investigation into the hidden gears of global industry valuable, consider subscribing. We don't just look at what technology does, we look at who it actually serves. Leave a comment below. Do you think the tech industry's obsession with disruption blinds us to practical solutions? Let me know.